From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this podcast series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues and developments. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views. For today's topic, we're going to do a deep dive into what is known as Amount B under the Pillar 1 efforts of the OECD Inclusive Framework. The goal around introducing Amount B is to standardize the remuneration of certain related party transactions. These types of transactions often draw scrutiny from taxing authorities around the world. The adoption of this Amount B could have major implications for multinational corporations. So to discuss these rules, I have two special guests. First, we'll be joined by Bob Stack, who has joined us on other podcasts in the past. Bob is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Tax Affairs for the U.S. Treasury International Division. And Bob will be joined by William Zimmerman, who is from Deloitte's transfer pricing practice. So Bob, I'll start with you. We've heard over the years a lot of talk about Pillars 1 and 2, and specifically about Amount A in Pillar 1. Amount A in Pillar 1, and then with Pillar 2, the 15% minimum tax. What is Amount B and where did it come from?
Thanks for the question, Carrie. It's funny, Amount B you can kind of think of as this very interesting good government idea that's been hanging out there for years. It doesn't relate at all really to Amount A or to the 15% min tax we've been hearing so much about. It's really about solving a different question, which is companies and countries for years have been telling us, we spend so much time and expense on controversies about what a distributor margin should be. And we may spend years and years and it goes to MAP or we have to slug it out in audits. And it's always about, well, is it 3.5 or 4.5? And, the margin, the delta between the ask and the give is pretty narrow. And so the world has said, can't we just sort this out in advance by coming up with a methodology so we know what will be acceptable distributor margins around the world? To make it simpler, the question is sometimes, can't we just pick a number and kind of all agree and save all that time and expense? So Amount B got to be part of the political deal that was settled in October 2021, and they are making progress, moving it forward, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail today.
And that makes sense that organizations would want that type of certainty. But why is it a topic of discussion now?
Well, because the OECD Inclusive Framework, that's like 137 countries, has been working away on how to build this thing. How do we set distributor margins that both taxpayers and jurisdictions can get comfortable with? And in December, they put out a paper, a consultation paper, and say, here's the state of work to date, and they had requested taxpayer and stakeholder comments to be put in by February 3rd on the various elements of this paper. So it's really the first outline we get to see of the direction of travel for Amount B at the Inclusive Framework.
Got it. Okay. And William, so now we have Amount A and we have now this new Amount B in Pillar 1. Is it clear now which companies are in scope for those rules and which ones are not?
Great question, Carrie, and thanks for allowing for me to join you today. So it is yes and no. So the consultation document, which is a consultation document, it's not written in stone yet, and the OECD is seeking comments from the community. It lays out that traditional buy-sell arrangements with distributors are in scope, as well as commissionaire arrangements. So arrangements where you're not taking title, but you're performing of the goods, but you're performing similar functions and taking on similar risks that you would typically see for a distributor. One of the points up for discussion and that the OECD is seeking comments on is whether we would look at digital goods and digital services. Should those be covered in scope? And that's a question mark right now. Naturally, with the goals of Amount B to reduce tax controversy, to simplify, baseline, returns for these types of entities, you can think why a variety of taxpayers would like to have that certainty for a multitude of reasons, right? From resource constraints they may have internally to, build predictability for financial reporting or for just being able to simplify their overall financial systems for booking these types of transactions. And so naturally, broadening the scope really should help out a lot more taxpayers. And so with that, yes and no, it does lay out, who would be in, but there's also some strict scoping criteria that could scope out a lot of companies as well. And so we're really keeping an eye on comments that are going to come in because we're kind of expecting those comments to push back against some of that criteria.
Got it. Okay. And for Amount B, how will the pricing be determined?
So that's another really good question. And I'm trying to kind of balance out this dynamic of, this needs to be arm's length pricing. This needs to follow the arm's length principle. And at the same time, as Bob mentioned, like we're trying to have a simplified approach. And so you have to balance out the complexity with also trying to satisfy this arm's length principle. And so what's been laid out in the consultation document, which again, not written in stone, is that a global search would be performed that would look at distributors across industries, across geographies, with a variety of different functional and asset intensities as well. And then there would be a regression analysis, so a statistical analysis on how important each one of those factors are in determining profitability. And the way that the consultation document currently lays out is that there would then be essentially a matrix where, as a taxpayer, I would look at my distributor, I would look at some of those key attributes, right? What's my OpEx intensity? What's my asset intensity? Where is this distributor located? And I could look at this matrix and say, aha, I'm going to have I'm just going to use an example. I'll have a 4% operating margin because I'm operating in this market and this industry, and here's some of my unique financial characteristics. And so that's what's been laid out. It's naturally a bit subjective, and so we would like to see a more simplified approach that is maybe a little more safe harbor in nature. That again goes back and accomplishes really the goal of Amount B of simplifying, easy to administrate, and really reducing tax controversy related to more simple transactions.
Bob, maybe you can comment around this ability for this Amount B to help avoid controversies. Do you think it will be effective in doing that? It still sounds rather subjective to me.
Well, here's the problem they're having, right? The problem is it's easy to say we're going to have pricing that covers distributors, but then you have to ask the harder question of, what are the functions, assets, and risks of a baseline distributing company? And so what they've done is they've come up with a set of scoping criteria. And what they're really trying to do is they're trying to scope out companies that are distributors, but that have other high value added functions, assets, and risks. And so they've got a quite exhaustive list in this consultation document. And William did stress it's a consultation document, so this is not the final, that carves out companies that do, let's say, too much R&D or other DEMPI functions or have, valuable marketing intangibles of their own. Well, once you move down that path, you run the risk that the disputes will not be about the margin on the businesses, which are the current disputes, but rather it'll be about, is this company really in scope or not? And so I think one of the challenges of this project is to get the countries and taxpayers to agree, here's what Amount B looks like, but then not to shift the current disputes into just, are you really in scope or not? Because then we won't have done anything. And I think the jury's out on this question of, will it minimize disputes? And they will be continuing to work around those issues. For example, one of the questions is, should we insist that intercompanies deals have contracts that would set forth the functions, assets, and risks to demonstrate to the tax authorities that they're only doing what is within scope of Amount B? But of course, tax authorities are always going to want to ask, okay, yeah, we see your contract, but do you actually function in the way you agreed in your contract? And have we just opened another door for controversy? So that's a big challenge of this project, how to minimize controversy and then how to tie that back to scoping. Because most taxpayers will tell you that the disputes around the world on distributors are rarely about the simplest LRD that does nothing but buy a box from its parent and on-sell it into a market. The disputes are always when there's a little something more going on and the tax authority wants to get more than an LRD return. Well, those are the very cases that are subject to this debate about what the scope should be. And therefore, those are the very cases we might move the controversy from pricing those transactions where there's a little more going on to are they in scope or not? And that's a big challenge in my view. But you have to kind of go back to the transfer pricing guidelines because a lot of people in the room say, well, wait a second, this is fundamentally a transfer pricing exercise. So the first tension is the tension between administrability and simplicity on the one hand. Imagine, pick a number, we all know it's 3% or 2.5% or 3.5%, versus is it consistent with the arm's length principle? So a lot of the document is trying to kind of move past that tension to make a methodology that everyone is comfortable is not just picking a number, but is comfortable with the arm's length standard. That's a huge tension. Another tension, which isn't spoken really out loud, is there are countries, and our listeners know this, that they do very well auditing distributors in their jurisdictions and getting pretty generous margins out of them through those disputes I referenced. And so the tension in the room is, why would those countries give up kind of a lucrative audit approach to take less money if there is a more disciplined or approach that leads to kind of narrower margins? Another tension is the needs of developing countries versus the needs of developed countries. Developed countries might say, I have tons of resources to audit these. And as I just mentioned, we do pretty well on the audit of distributors, and we're pretty good at ferreting out these high value functions, assets, and risks for which we demand extra margin. Developing countries, of course, would like that, but they're resource constrained. And so they're looking for something that is simpler and more administrable. And so as are, the delegates from the various countries in the room, they're playing with a lot of those tensions. The last one I would add is this idea that do the stakeholders really believe we get certainty from this? Or are they concerned that the tax authorities will take whatever approach is done here and then seek other ways to have controversy? So it's a little bit of a trust issue among everybody of, can we really achieve the certainty that this document seems to want to promise?
So, William, what are the next steps for the OECD and when might we expect to see a final product?
Yeah. So the OECD is digesting comments right now from the tax community, and they have laid out that they're expecting the technical work on Amount B to be completed around mid-2023. They seem to have a trend of releasing documents close to holidays. I'm going to say maybe 4th of July, if I had to guess. And then, when we think about this will actually roll out and impact taxpayers, they're expecting it to really come into effect in 2024. And the goal is really to align it with, again, some of the larger Pillar 1 initiatives, such as Amount A and the removal of digital services taxes and other unilateral measures. And so there's a lot of work that the OECD has on its plate among, with Amount B, with Amount A, with Pillar 1 in general, and then the larger Pillar 2 and the larger tax landscape.
Thank you, both of you, Bob and William, for that interesting update. More to come, and certainly something that organizations will want to stay close to, because I think the desire for certainty and simplicity is strong in this area. So I look forward to hearing the next update from you all. If people would like more information, go to Deloitte.com and search OECD Pillar 1. There's a variety of materials there. You can also connect with Bob and William directly via LinkedIn or tune in here for future policy editions. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all continue to be well.